November 13th, 2024, New Jersey. The Picatinny Arsenal, a military research facility, would be the origin point of this first crazy conspiracy. Because it was this night, local residents began seeing these large unidentified drones flying over the area. At first, they seemed to initially stay kind of in the same general area, but soon, the sighting spread across a much wider area, and New York and Philadelphia also began to see these drones. They were often described as being as big as SUVs. Other times, they were reported to have a loud humming sound. Sometimes, they were spread out over entire neighborhoods, while other times, they were over sensitive locations like military bases or police departments, and even over a reservoir at one point, and allegedly showing up around airplanes. But before long, more reports came in from witnesses that, how should I say it, were more highly trained and more credible, like law enforcement officers or military officers. There were even legislators that came out and stated a Coast Guard ship had been followed by a dozen drones. However, by December, the sightings gradually went away, but it was too late, because it had already went viral on TikTok, and soon everyone was discussing these drones and what they had been doing, and, the more important question, who was controlling them. Of course, many suggested China right away as the party behind it, or Iran, and it was theorized they were basically being used to spy on several military installations, whereas most of the skeptics labeled it as misidentifications or straight-up altered footage, and of course, some mass hysteria sprinkled in. And the government tended to agree with these skeptics, with the new administration of the White House releasing a statement which claimed these were just drones of hobbyists used for research and various reasons, and it was definitely not the bad guys. But what if that was just a cover-up? What if they were being controlled by another country, and not just for spying, but for a more devious reason? For that, we have to look at another part of this theory. Although most of the drone sightings played out in the Northeast, there were other sightings recorded in Florida, Texas, Utah, even as far away as California. And it's these sightings in California we are going to discuss. Because on January 7th, just 2 days after the news website dronexl.co reported that these drone sightings were no longer receiving news coverage or attention on social media, a series of destructive wildfires broke out in the Los Angeles metro area, which are still active as of this recording. The Palisades Fire and Eaton Fire are the third and second most destructive fires in California history, with close to 60,000 acres being burned up at this point. And of course, there's also the human element of it. Sadly, 29 people have lost their lives, with more than 200,000 having to evacuate. The spread of the fires have been caused by several unlucky circumstances, such as drought, low humidity, built-up vegetation from the previous winter, and hurricane-force winds. However, arson investigators don't actually know what caused each individual fire, and that's left the door open for conspiracies. And one of these that is circling the conspiracy forums now is that the drones we've seen in November and December are the same drones that caused the fires in California, or at least they're drones being operated by the same foreign entity that was used in the Northeast. That's right, China. After a successful test run on the Atlantic coast, in which the goal was to destabilize the population with what basically amounts to psychological warfare, they turned to the West Coast. Here, a drone could fly over a place that is very dry, vulnerable, and strategically important, like Los Angeles. And using these tiny, almost invisible igniters, something like small capsules containing highly flammable materials that catch fire on impact and quickly uses the strong winds to spread, the drones would drop a time-delayed ignition, which then gave the drone time to get out of the area before the fire got started. Maybe all these ignitions could even be set to start fires simultaneously. Imagine hundreds of these remote igniters being dropped all over the place at once. The emergency responders in either case would be overwhelmed, and it would severely disrupt the region. But why would China do it? Well, for one, the tension between the two countries have risen over the past few years, but it would also just be very difficult to prove that China, or anyone, was using drones to set large forest fires. And what better way to destabilize the country? I mean, you already shook up the East Coast with psychological warfare. Now the West Coast has seen the worst fires in decades. If US infrastructure can come down this easily, and the government knows it, and the government knows it was attacked, it will be nervous, and they will also cover it up. Heck, maybe with the US focused on such crises, it would not pay attention to what China and Russia are up to in other parts of the world. Or maybe it's all being done for financial reasons, like Chinese entities using the disaster as an opportunity to buy up land at reduced prices, once that land is burned up to the ground and abandoned, that is. Or maybe this is just the beginning. Could there be more fires, power grid sabotage, cyber attacks, or was it just random wildfires? This is our second lottery conspiracy since we have started this series, with the first one being the less serious one, which was the lottery was created to catch time travelers theory. This one is more serious and possibly real. It's the rigged lottery theory, which, as you guessed it, basically suggests that Powerball, Mega Millions, and various other lotteries are all rigged to maximize state and federal revenue while giving the illusion that someone will win on random chance. It hinges on the assumption that these lottery organizations pre-select the winning numbers, then they remove this set of numbers from the quick pick option. And if you're not familiar with that term, the majority of lottery players can just select quick pick, which then buys the lottery ticket and gives them a randomly generated number, while a small minority will actually pick their own numbers, usually ones they believe are lucky. Anyways, if the lottery organizations took the winning number out of the random generated number pool, then obviously no one will win. Unless, of course, you're one of the few that selects your own number, and then by chance, you actually pick the right number. Even then, the lottery organizations would just go back and change the winning number to make sure you don't win. Regardless, no winners would ever hit the jackpot until it reaches the predetermined threshold. This way, they can be sure to drive up ticket sales and increase the tax revenue, which would mean the jackpots are strategically inflated to encourage more people to play, which is exactly what would happen since the lottery targets lower income individuals who see it as their only chance for financial freedom. Some even take it further and suggest that the winners are actors or completely fabricated. They could be government stooges who win and then the government really just keeps all the revenue. And in staying in line with the lottery targeting the lower income, there's an alternate version of this theory that suggests that the lottery is not some scheme for the government to steal all of the jackpot money, but instead it's just a way to keep the middle and lower classes beat down, by making them complacent, offering them a false hope of getting rich, and to keep draining their income by having them waste their money on what would be a ridiculously small chance of winning anyways, all the while making it look like it's completely fair and like you have as much a chance of winning as anyone else does. To Christians around the world, the Book of Revelation is a book that is seen as one of the most important in the entire Bible, mainly because it is believed to tell the future of the end-time events, things that will happen that will be signs of the imminent coming of the rapture, the second coming. One of these is the mark of the beast, a mark that identifies followers of the Antichrist. It is said it will be placed on the hand or forehead, and it's associated with the number 666. It's basically supposed to be a way to show that Satan has taken ownership of that person. And as we keep making bounds and leaps in technology, it's no surprise that some people believe we are in the end times. Take digital currency for example. From its inception, it's been loosely linked to the mark of the beast. But the one that has really drawn the ire of many Christians is Neuralink, the company founded by Elon Musk with the goal to create electronic chips to put into the brains of people who suffered a traumatic brain injury. There have since been other advances, like in September of 2024 when Neuralink announced its latest success, blind sight, which would allow blind people to regain some level of vision. But what if there's a darker motive for Neuralink? What if its ultimate goal is to create these brain chips as a way to eventually control all of humanity? With this rapid development, it's easy to see why some conspiracy theorists and some Christians believe that is exactly what the goal is. The theory further elaborates Elon's latest dive into the political world as nothing more than an effort to find support for Neuralink's expansion, pressuring politicians with money and lobbying to greenlight initiatives that would allow Neuralink to operate with minimal or no regulation, where it would then be pushed under the guise that it's helping with the progress of mankind, or going to lead to an innovational breakthrough that would even begin pushing the Neuralink brain chips as a solution to a problem that does not yet exist, but will at some point. Maybe, even as the Bible suggests, the problem will be financial in nature, and without this brain chip, or hand chip, you cannot purchase anything. Soon, everyone will be pressured into accepting these chips. But what if these chips are not there just for control, and could be used to create better soldiers, or better workers, aka easier to control slave labor? That's when the theory begins to intertwine with the growing interest in AI, and suggest the bigger plan is to blend human and machine via these chips, as a way to create the perfect worker or soldier. Others have an even crazier take and suggest that Elon, known for being bold, volunteered to be the first person to have this chip planted into his brain, so he could test it out on his own to see its real capabilities. But he overestimated how secure they were because he was hacked by Russia, who then began to control him, sorta like an Elon bot, which explains the erratic statements or possibly even glitches he seems to have during public appearances. In either scenario, the theory comes out with the same conclusion. Elon, using the chip, AI, and automation, wants to reshape humanity in his image, but whether or not he is the Antichrist implementing the mark of the beast, like many Christians believe, that is still too early to tell. In our time of covering various mysteries, we have taken a look at a lot of cryptid tales, from the very crazy ones that almost certainly do not exist, to the ones that might be very plausible. For instance, the phantom kangaroos one we covered, which detailed various kangaroo sightings in the US, many times seen while driving or camping, or really any activity in the woods, sounds absurd, but these sightings are probably real. It's believed some of them were just exotic pets, which then escaped or were released after someone didn't want to take care of them anymore. Still, many of the phantom kangaroo sightings could just be misidentified real local wildlife, but some of the more crazier theories suggest that a small population from an extinct animal, like some kind of dinosaur, defied all the odds and is still surviving somewhere out there on the Great American Plains, which plays into our next conspiracy that these phantom kangaroos, or really any cryptids, are artificial animals that are part of a secret government project, one in which they try to bring extinct species back to life, sort of like Jurassic Park. And then these animals, who are being controlled, are used for covert purposes, dark covert purposes. Like, what if these cryptids, which we have already established are artificial animals, are being created to hunt people that are trying to live off the grid, or at the bare minimum, trying to disrupt anyone who is attempting to live off the grid? The theory basically ties into the thought that the government, or these shadow entities, want to make natural environments more dangerous by releasing these genetically modified creatures to hunt down anyone that is trying to escape their control, or trying to escape society in general. It would serve to create fear and discourage people from exploring outdoors, or venturing too far into the woods where you could no longer be controlled or monitored. This would help to discourage self-reliance and force complete societal dependence on the government or the secret entity. These animals could range from the genetically modified predators, like dogmen, that are responsible for the 411 disappearances in the forest, or they could even be surveillance tools disguised as totally mundane natural wildlife. And it could also explain why sightings of Bigfoot are just that, sightings, because they are there to monitor you, or perhaps serve as a warning not to venture off any further, before they themselves disappear. After just a few videos in this series, we have looked at several theories that discuss governments that are made up of masterminds who are able to create these complex, world-altering schemes that, with the help of some secret societies, are able to control each and every one of us through varying methods. But what if the complete opposite is true? What if the government is just dumb and lazy and corrupt, instead of it being this well-oiled, highly efficient machine that is watching every move you make? They're actually pretty crappy at their jobs, and doing whatever they can to survive in the system that they were elected to. And they spend much of that time not only patting down their own wallet, but always running for re-election and never actually trying to solve any real problems, which would explain why so many government-run projects are over budget, or delayed, or fail completely, because the people who are behind these plans are not really concerned if the projects do well or if they flop. They just need to spend their time covering their tracks and keeping their power. And instead of these masterminds orchestrating these grand conspiracies to manipulate global events and its own citizens, it's really just bumbling attempts to keep the entire system from falling apart. And that the cover-up conspiracy theorists so often talk about is really just lazy, incompetent human beings. Instead of that government project where money vanished, that conspiracy theorists told us was being funneled into secret military tech, maybe that very mundane government project was just way over budget, and now it's seen as an expensive mistake that the government made, and they want to cover it up. Speaking of that, what about black projects that are supposed to be going into this mind-blowing, high-tech government innovations that the military will use? Well, what if that massive amount of money going into these programs is really just being siphoned off by the government and several contractors, and there are no secret programs? That could also, of course, mean that the government's technology is several years behind, maybe decades behind, which explains why they can't solve certain problems that seem very simple to the everyday citizen. Take traffic congestion, for example. Pretty straightforward solution. Improve public transit, update infrastructure, or introduce smart traffic management systems. But if the government is using outdated traffic models from 1970 to manage current traffic congestion instead of using AI-driven traffic management systems or real-time data collection to adjust traffic signals dynamically, then it could totally explain why these simple problems continue to exist. Because instead of using this cutting-edge technology, their solution is to just add another lane, bro, which is just too simple and outdated. This, of course, would go into other areas as well, like cybersecurity, public health, data management, education, etc. They would all be lagging behind the private sector. This theory basically assumes that the real goal isn't world domination or secret knowledge, but doing the bare minimum and trying to avoid being blamed for any big failure, even if that means turning a blind eye to real issues. It's all about self-preservation, not losing your seat in the Senate or House, or in that presidential chair, or of course, the millions of federal workers, or even millions more of federal contractors. And that's the scary part about this one. Most of it is probably true. Institutions that we rely on every day are barely functioning and limping along. Instead of some shadowy, omnipotent force that is in control of our lives, it's just a massive machine ill-equipped to handle the changes of modern society. And that modern machine is not made up of the Illuminati or lizard people. It's far worse than that. It's actually maintained by people that come from our states, cities, and neighborhoods. The barely functioning government is made up by people like you and me, and it's a miracle that it survives at all. That is the theory. When it comes to religion, Christianity has for a long time now been part of the bedrock of Western societies, especially in America, where the two top religions, Protestantism and Catholicism, are the two biggest in the country and fall strictly under the Christian umbrella. In fact, in 1976, 91% of the United States population reported they were Christians, which is the highest point of the century. But by 2022, only 64% profess to being a Christian. And while it's one thing to tell others you are a certain faith, it's a whole other thing to actually practice being one. And recent polls shows there is a drop. In 1999, 70% of people polled cited they belonged to a church, where one would assume means they go somewhat occasionally. Compare that to 2020, where only 47% of Americans said they belonged to a church. The first time in this country's history where less than half of the citizens belonged to a church. Since 1970, church-attending Catholics dropped from 55% to 20%. And since 1976, the church has had more than 30 million people leave the church. Baptists have not been spared either, losing close to 2.5 million members just between 2006 in 2020. And of course, I'm just taking a small sample size from America, but basically, the rest of the world has seen a similar drop in the people practicing the faith, which begs the question, what are the churches doing to get people back in the pews? Some are trying many different things, such as holding more social events, bringing in modern music styles, or new types of preaching styles. A lot have went online to stream sermons in an effort to bring people back, or by holding virtual Bible studies. And obviously, getting feedback on why many people choose not to go has also helped in working on these issues. Of course, some churches have just doubled down on traditional methods and are slowly watching their members wither away, and the church is getting closer and closer to shutting its doors. But what if there is a more devious way to make sure Christianity stays at the forefront? That brings us to the Christianity Illuminati theory. That's right, this theory suggests that a shadowy elite group is working behind the scenes to make sure Christianity still plays a big role in global geopolitics, despite its shrinking numbers. And how do they do that? Well, this covert action, employed by Catholics and Protestants alike, find other growing or competing religions around the world and then join them. And after some time of being there, and hopefully moving up the ranks, the infiltrator starts slowly subverting the followers by introducing Christian ideas. It wouldn't be something like a grand announcement or grand takeover. It would instead be more subtle and gradual, slowly altering their practices, beliefs, and policies to those that match more closely with Christian principles, all the while hiding the fact that this is their intent. This way, not only is Christianity surviving, but it's growing in the form of other faiths, all by making certain aspects of its beliefs more palatable to followers of other faiths who might not agree normally, which comes back to the broader conspiracy that this Christian Illuminati is steering humanity back towards a universal or global Christian theocracy. And if you think that is too crazy to believe, don't forget, this was the very exact goal of the church during the Age of Discovery. Basically every culture that the European explorers came into contact with, well, they tried to convert them to Christianity. Well, I mean, that was the next goal after stealing all their local resources, but you know what I mean. Once all these other faiths have been infiltrated and converted, then it would set the stage for a final religious revolution, which re-established Christianity at the top of the global order again. At least, that's what the theory suggests. Does the current news cycle leave you feeling overwhelmed? Are you suffering from sensory overload? I would guess there are many of us that feel that way. It's like every day some news article is brought to your attention that could be quite concerning. Or maybe a colleague shared a video with you documenting governmental abuses, and you start to look into it more, but now there's a whole new breaking story that takes your attention away. Then another, and before long, you can't focus on anything the government is doing. It's just too many issues popping up one after the other. So is this a fluke? Or just many things happening at once? Or are you just paying attention more? Or is there a more sinister plot at work? This theory is known as overload tactic, which suggests the US government, in coordination with major institutions as well as billion-dollar companies, have learned the skill of something called strategic narrative saturation, a form of information warfare whose sole purpose is to make sure the American public is not informed, nor educated on current events, but instead overwhelmed completely, leaving many to completely check out and not care for the current political climate. The theory is actually not a new concept and has been used in the past. Heck, Putin has perfectly pulled off this ploy ever since he came to power, bombarding Russians with many fictional and factual news stories. So many that the Russians have no clear picture of what's going on. Western leaders have called it the fire hose of falsehood. But the strategy is way more efficient now since we have hit the digital age. News is non-stop playing on YouTube, TikTok, social media, partisan battles, viral controversies, etc. And while some people don't tap out and ignore it completely, the ones who actually engage with the news cycle become completely trapped in this cycle of emotional outrage. I'm sure you know the type who just doom scroll all day long, intentionally looking for stories that will upset them. so they can complain about it. And that's a big key in this one. For the ones that don't walk away, they get completely emotionally involved, and they are not actually encouraged to think critically about the issues, but rather feel anger, fear, or outrage, which never allows them to actually see the bigger picture and keeps them from binding together and challenging the real centers of power. Instead, they channel their frustrations into social media feuds, or become loyal to a political party, or blindly follow a leader like a cult member. While all this is going on, behind the scenes, the real powers of America are doing whatever they please, and you're not paying attention. Maybe they are quietly doing these huge company mergers which eliminate competition in huge sectors of the economy. Now technology, healthcare, agriculture, media, etc. rest in just a few hands. Or maybe the entire financial system is being restructured, taking actions that make sure as much wealth as possible gets back to the top, while continually putting the stranglehold on the middle class. Not to mention, AI and digital surveillance gradually gets more encompassing, and you can't even step outside without the government knowing it. But hey, at least you totally own that guy on Twitter, right? There's also the fact that using this strategy completely nullifies any possibility that anyone from the government or corporations will actually ever be punished for any crime. That's where it really gets interesting about this one. Doing this allows the real powers that be to suppress those scandals that could wreck them by burying them with other stories. So technically, they are not covering them up. Hey, the story of that political scandal was on the news, you wasn't even paying attention to it. That's your fault. Or that billionaire who was investigated for insider trading, nothing may have happened to him, but you didn't seem to care last year when the story was out. You didn't even read the article, so stop complaining. By the time it's over, your freedoms are so eroded, and the real resistance is pretty much futile, all thanks to the information overload strategy. If you have a child, there is a good possibility that they have bought Pokemon cards at one time or another, or at least have other friends that collect them. Or maybe, once they got a little older, they invested in Magic the Gathering cards. Or maybe, many of you listening now bought Magic cards, or still do. So it's somewhat ironic, in a time where people are online screaming about certain groups or certain activities, recruiting their children for nefarious reasons, that nobody ever points out the most obvious conspiracy. Las Vegas, and by extension, the mob, are recruiting teens and children through the selling of Pokemon and Pokemon-type games. But how, you may ask? It's quite simple, really. It's all in an effort to normalize gambling behaviors. That way, they will have gambling addicts once they reach adulthood. Pokemon is just an example, of course. There are many other toys and collectibles doing the same thing, like certain action figures, as well as other types of card games. Regardless of what exactly the item is, every child wants to pull that ultra rare one, the one worth hundreds of dollars, perhaps thousands of dollars. This creates a sense of exclusivity and competition. But to get to that point, you have to open the package. That in itself is addicting, because with these randomized rewards, the kids have no idea what they're getting until they tear that little sealed package open. Really, it's not unlike slot machines or scratch-off lottery tickets. And many of you will say, well, the difference is these kids can play with these cards. That may be, but to many, that takes a back seat to the gambling portion. The excitement of opening the package and hopefully getting a magnificent pull, that alone triggers a dopamine release, not unlike gambling. Likewise, the conspiracy can even go back decades when children would buy baseball cards more often, all in hopes of landing a very rare card. Heck, you can even take it a step further and point out the targeting of younger children, who may open a Kinder Surprise egg, which comes with a chocolate egg and a toy inside. Or, even in the previous decades, the Cracker Jack box, which used to come with a popcorn snack and gift in every box, but was discontinued in 2016. Now what's really interesting is this market is growing, whether it be Pokemon or Magic the Gathering or just blind toy boxes. The market for them is expanding. Many of these run in the $10 to $15 range. It only gets worse when you go into the digital world, where microtransactions have taken over video games. Now getting loot boxes for weapon upgrades or rare weapon skins provides an almost irresistible offer. Just spend a couple of bucks to unlock the crate, and you may win a super rare item which is worth real-world money. And if children can be taught to associate spending money with randomized rewards, they will more likely view gambling as an adult in the same way, especially if they feel that this is just normal behavior. That brings us to the end of this edition of the Crazy Conspiracies Explained. I hope you guys enjoyed. Goodbye and good night.